Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carried another heavy box of communications equipment across the dusty NATO training camp in Eastern Europe. The September sun beat down mercilessly, and her uniform stuck to her skin uncomfortably. Around her, soldiers from various countries moved with purpose, preparing for the joint military exercise that would begin the following week. She had been at the camp for only 3 days, but already she could feel the weight of countless stares and whispered conversations following her wherever she went. Being one of the few female communications specialists at the camp was challenging enough, but what made things worse were the constant comments about her appearance and her abilities. "Look at the little princess trying to carry that heavy box," sneered Sergeant Thompson from the British contingent as she passed by. His companions laughed, their voices carrying across the training ground. Maybe she should stick to filing papers instead of pretending to be a real soldier. Sarah kept her head down and continued walking, her jaw clenched tight. She had heard variations of this comment dozens of times since arriving. The men seemed to think that her petite frame and youthful appearance meant she couldn't handle the physical and mental demands of military service. They had no idea what she had been through to get here. At 26 years old, Sarah had already served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a communications specialist with the U.S. Army. She had seen combat, saved lives with her quick thinking and technical expertise, and earned the respect of her unit. But here, surrounded by special forces from different nations, she felt like she was starting from zero again. The NATO camp housed elite soldiers from 12 different countries, all gathered for a month-long joint training exercise designed to improve international cooperation in special operations. Sarah had been selected for this assignment because of her exceptional skills in communications technology and her ability to speak 4 languages fluently. It was supposed to be the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to work alongside the best soldiers in the world. Instead, it felt like being thrown to a pack of wolves. "Martinez," barked Colonel Peterson, the American officer in charge of her unit. "Quit dawdling and get that equipment to the communications tent. We don't have all day." Sarah quickened her pace, ignoring the burning sensation in her shoulders from the weight of the equipment. The communications tent was located at the far end of the camp, past the training areas where various special forces units were conducting exercises. She could hear the sharp crack of gunfire from the shooting range and the shouts of instructors drilling their troops. As she approached the tent, she noticed a group of soldiers gathered around a picnic table, playing cards and drinking coffee. They wore the distinctive uniform patches of different special forces units: Navy SEALs, British SAS, German KSK, and others. These were the elite of the elite, men who had undergone years of brutal training to earn their positions. One of them, a tall soldier with a thick Russian accent, looked up as she struggled with the heavy box. "Hey, American girl," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "You sure you can handle that? Maybe you need strong man to help you?" The other soldiers chuckled, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She had dealt with this kind of treatment before, but it never got easier. The assumption that she was weak, that she didn't belong here, that she was somehow less capable than her male counterparts. It was exhausting. "I can manage, thank you," she replied firmly, shifting the box to get a better grip. "Oh, she has attitude," laughed another soldier, this one with a French accent. "Very cute. But attitude won't help you when the real training starts tomorrow. This isn't a game for little girls." Sarah wanted to respond, to tell them exactly what she thought of their attitudes, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she continued toward the communications tent, their laughter following her. Inside the tent, the atmosphere was slightly better. The communications equipment was sophisticated and complex, requiring real expertise to operate. This was her domain, where her knowledge and skills meant something. She began setting up the radio systems and satellite communications gear, losing herself in the familiar work. Technical Sergeant Williams, a seasoned communications specialist from the Canadian Forces, was already working at one of the stations. He looked up as she entered and gave her a sympathetic smile. "Don't let them get to you," he said quietly. "Half of those guys are all talk anyway. When the real work starts, they'll see what you're capable of." Sarah nodded gratefully. It was the first genuinely supportive comment she had received since arriving at the camp. "I just want to do my job and prove I belong here," she said. "You wouldn't be here if you didn't belong," Williams replied. "The selection process for this exercise was brutal. Only the best made it. Trust me, I've seen your file. Your record speaks for itself." The encouraging words helped lift Sarah's spirits slightly, but she knew the real challenges were yet to come. The joint exercise would test every aspect of their training: physical endurance, tactical knowledge, equipment expertise, and the ability to work under extreme pressure. She was confident in her technical abilities, but she worried about how the constant harassment and undermining comments would affect her performance. As the day wore on, Sarah continued setting up equipment and running diagnostics on the communication systems. The work was complex and demanding, requiring precise attention to detail. One small mistake could compromise the entire communication network for the exercise, potentially putting lives at risk during training scenarios. Around dinner time, she took a break and walked to the mess tent. The large canvas structure was filled with soldiers from different countries, creating a babel of languages and accents. She grabbed a tray and got in line for food, trying to ignore the stares and whispers that seemed to follow her everywhere. The food was typical military fare, hearty but not particularly appetizing. Sarah found an empty spot at a table in the corner and ate in silence, listening to the conversations around her. The soldiers were discussing the upcoming exercises, sharing stories from their own experiences, and speculating about the challenges they would face. At a nearby table, she overheard a group of Navy SEALs talking about their recent deployment. Their conversation was filled with technical jargon and inside references that spoke to their extensive training and experience. Despite her resentment at their earlier treatment of her, Sarah couldn't help but be impressed by their obvious competence and professionalism. One of them, an older soldier with graying hair and numerous scars on his hands, was telling a story about a mission in hostile territory where their communications had been compromised. The way he described the technical problems and their creative solutions showed a deep understanding of the systems Sarah worked with every day. The thing people don't understand about communications, he was saying, is that it's not just about the equipment, it's about understanding how information flows, how to adapt when systems fail, how to maintain contact even when everything goes wrong. It takes real expertise, real training. Sarah found herself nodding along with his words. This was exactly what she had been trying to explain to people for years. Communications wasn't just about pushing buttons and following procedures. It required deep technical knowledge, quick thinking, and the ability to solve complex problems under pressure. After dinner, she returned to the communications tent to continue her work. The evening brought cooler temperatures, and the camp began to quiet down as soldiers prepared for the intensive training that would begin the next morning. Sarah worked late into the night, fine-tuning the communication systems and conducting final tests. She wanted everything to be perfect when the exercise began. This was her chance to prove herself, to show that she deserved to be here alongside the elite soldiers from around the world. As she worked, she became aware of voices outside the tent. A group of soldiers was walking past, their conversation clearly audible through the canvas walls. "I still can't believe they sent a woman for this exercise," one of them was saying. "What's next? Sending children? Maybe she's here to cook and clean for us," another voice suggested, followed by crude laughter. "I heard she supposedly has combat experience," a third voice added. "But you know how it is with women in the military. They probably kept her safe behind the lines and gave her a medal for filing paperwork." Sarah's hands clenched into fists as she listened to their conversation. The ignorance and prejudice in their words was infuriating. They had no idea what she had been through, what she had accomplished, what she was capable of. They saw only what they wanted to see. A small woman who didn't fit their narrow definition of what a soldier should look like. She forced herself to focus on her work, checking and rechecking the communication protocols. Tomorrow would be her chance to prove them wrong. The exercise would test everyone's limits, and she was determined to show that she could not only keep up but excel. The tent flap opened, and Colonel Peterson entered, followed by several other senior officers. They were conducting a final inspection of the communication setup before the exercise began. "How are we looking, Martinez?" Peterson asked, his tone businesslike but not unfriendly. "All systems are operational, sir," Sarah reported. "I've run full diagnostics on every piece of equipment. Communication links with all participating units are clear and stable. Backup systems are ready in case of primary system failure." Peterson nodded approvingly as he looked over the sophisticated array of equipment. "Good work. The success of this exercise depends heavily on maintaining clear communication between the different national units. We can't afford any technical failures." "Understood, sir. I've also prepared alternative communication protocols in case we encounter unexpected interference or equipment malfunctions during the field exercises. One of the other officers, a stern-looking man with a German accent, stepped forward. The communication challenges in this exercise will be significant, he said. We will be operating in terrain that naturally interferes with radio signals. Electronic warfare scenarios will test the operator's ability to maintain contact under hostile conditions. Are you prepared for these challenges? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Yes, sir. I've studied the terrain maps and prepared frequency hopping protocols to counter electronic interference. I've also set up relay stations to ensure coverage in the difficult terrain areas. The officers exchanged glances, and Sarah caught a hint of approval in their expressions. Her thorough preparation and technical knowledge were evident, and even these seasoned military leaders seemed impressed by her readiness. After the inspection, Sarah continued working until well past midnight. She wanted to be absolutely certain that everything was perfect. As she finally prepared to leave the tent, she noticed something that made her pause. On the table next to her workstation, someone had left a small note. Written in neat handwriting were the words, "Don't let them break you. Show them what you're made of." Sarah looked around the tent, but she was alone. Someone had left this message of encouragement for her, probably while she was focused on her work. The knowledge that at least one person in the camp believed in her abilities gave her a boost of confidence. She carefully folded the note and put it in her pocket. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. The joint exercise would push every soldier to their limits, testing their physical endurance, tactical knowledge, and ability to work as part of an international team. Sarah walked back to her quarters through the quiet camp. The night air was cool and refreshing after the heat of the day. Above her, the stars shone brightly in the clear sky, unmarred by the light pollution of cities. It was a beautiful, peaceful scene that belied the intensity of the training that would begin in just a few hours. In her small quarters, Sarah prepared her equipment for the next day. Her uniform was clean and ready, her personal gear organized and checked. She had learned long ago that attention to detail and preparation often made the difference between success and failure in military operations. As she lay in bed, trying to get some sleep before the challenging day ahead, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. Growing up in a military family, she had always been drawn to service. Her father had been a career Army officer, and her older brother was a Marine. She had learned early that respect had to be earned, not given, and that actions spoke louder than words. Her military career had not been easy. She had faced discrimination and harassment before, but she had also found mentors and allies who recognized her potential. Her technical skills had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed, and her determination had carried her through challenges that might have defeated others. The NATO camp represented the pinnacle of her career so far, an opportunity to work alongside the most elite soldiers in the world. She was determined not to waste this chance. No matter how difficult the other soldiers made it for her, tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to quiet her mind, knowing that she would need all her strength and focus for what lay ahead. The ghost hawk tattoo on her shoulder, hidden beneath her uniform, seemed to pulse with meaning in the darkness. It was a symbol that connected her to something larger than herself, something that the other soldiers could not yet understand. The sharp blast of the morning reveille cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 0500 hours. Sarah was already awake, having barely slept due to a mixture of anticipation and anxiety about the day ahead. She dressed quickly in her field uniform and gathered her gear, checking each item twice to ensure nothing was forgotten. The mess tent was buzzing with activity as soldiers from different nations grabbed quick breakfasts before the exercise began. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation, and conversations were subdued as everyone focused on the challenges ahead. Sarah noticed that the casual mockery from the previous day had been replaced by a more serious, professional demeanor as the soldiers prepared for the demanding training. Colonel Peterson stood at the front of the briefing tent as the assembled soldiers filed in. Maps and diagrams covered the walls, showing the complex terrain where the exercise would take place. The area included dense forests, rocky hills, several rivers, and abandoned buildings that would serve as mock enemy positions. "Gentlemen," Peterson began, then caught himself and glanced at Sarah. "And, lady, today marks the beginning of Operation Nordic Thunder, a month-long joint training exercise designed to test and improve our international cooperation capabilities. You represent the finest special operations forces from 12 NATO nations. The colonel outlined the first phase of the exercise, which would involve multiple teams conducting simultaneous operations across the training area. Communication between teams would be critical for coordination and safety. Each team would include soldiers from different countries, forcing them to work together despite language barriers and different training methods. Your first mission, Peterson continued, will be a reconnaissance and communication relay exercise. Each team must establish contact with base command and maintain communication throughout a 12-hour operation in challenging terrain. Electronic warfare specialists will be attempting to disrupt your communications using sophisticated jamming equipment. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. This was exactly the type of challenge that would test her technical skills under pressure. The success of her assigned team would depend heavily on her ability to maintain communication links despite active interference. Teams were announced, and Sarah found herself assigned to Team Delta, which included 6 soldiers from 4 different countries. There was Sergeant Hans Müller from the German KSK, Corporal James Wright from the British SAS, Lieutenant Eric Anderson from the Danish Special Operations Forces, Private Pavel Novak from the Czech Special Forces, and Sergeant Miguel Santos from the Spanish Navy. The team leader was Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson from the U.S. Army Rangers, not the same Thompson who had mocked her the day before, but another soldier with the same surname. This Thompson was older, more experienced, and his initial assessment of Sarah seemed neutral rather than hostile. "All right, team," Thompson said as they gathered around a tactical map. "Our objective is to conduct reconnaissance on 3 target sites and report back with detailed intelligence. Martinez will handle communications. The rest of us will split into pairs for the recon work." Müller, the German soldier, looked skeptical. "Are we sure the communication specialist can keep up with the physical demands of this mission? The terrain is rough, and we'll be moving fast." "I can keep up," Sarah replied firmly. "I've completed the same physical training as everyone else here." "Right." The British SAS soldier studied her with calculating eyes. "Physical training is one thing. Combat experience is another. Have you actually been in a firefight or have you just practiced on a range?" Sarah felt her temper rising but kept her voice steady. "I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne. I've been in more firefights than I care to remember." The soldiers exchanged glances, and she could see some surprise in their expressions. Her slight build and youthful appearance apparently didn't match their expectations of a combat veteran. "Well then," said Anderson, the Danish soldier, "I guess we'll see what you're made of." The team gathered their equipment and moved out to their assigned starting position. Sarah carried her standard field pack plus the additional communication gear needed for the mission. The extra weight was noticeable, but she had trained extensively with heavy loads and was confident in her ability to maintain the pace. The first part of their route led through dense forest terrain. The trees provided cover from observation, but the thick canopy would interfere with satellite communications. Sarah had anticipated this and prepared alternative communication methods, including high-frequency radio protocols that could bounce signals off the ionosphere. As they moved through the forest, Sarah noticed that Thompson was setting a deliberately challenging pace. He was testing her, seeing if she could keep up with the experienced Special Forces soldiers. She matched their speed without complaint, even as her pack straps dug into her shoulders and sweat began to soak through her uniform. After 2 hours of movement, they reached their first observation point overlooking a mock enemy facility. Thompson called a halt, and the team settled into concealed positions to observe the target. Sarah immediately began setting up her communication equipment, establishing contact with Base Command and the other teams in the exercise. "Base, this is Team Delta," she spoke quietly into her headset microphone. "We have reached Checkpoint Alpha and are beginning reconnaissance of Target 1. The response crackled through her earpiece. "Team Delta, this is Base. Copy your arrival at Checkpoint Alpha. Be advised, electronic warfare operations will begin in 15 minutes. Sarah acknowledged the transmission and began preparing for the communication disruption that was coming. She switched to frequency-hopping radios and activated the electronic countermeasures equipment she had prepared for just this scenario. While the other team members conducted their reconnaissance with binoculars and cameras, Sarah worked to maintain communication links as the promised electronic interference began. Her radio display showed multiple attempts to jam their frequencies, but her countermeasures were holding. "Impressive," Müller said quietly, watching her work. Most communication operators would have lost contact by now. Sarah didn't respond verbally but appreciated the acknowledgement of her skills. She was completely focused on her equipment, making constant adjustments to stay ahead of the jamming attempts. The reconnaissance of the first target took 3 hours to complete. The team gathered detailed intelligence about the facility's layout, defensive positions, and patrol patterns. Throughout this time, Sarah maintained clear communication with Base Command and received updates from the other teams. As they prepared to move to the second target, Wright approached her position. "That was solid work back there," he admitted grudgingly. "I've worked with communication specialists who couldn't maintain contact under normal conditions, let alone with active jamming." "Thank you," Sarah replied, carefully packing her equipment. "This is what I'm trained for." The second target was located across a river and up a steep hillside. The physical challenge was significant, requiring the team to cross the water while keeping their equipment dry, and then climb through rocky terrain that would test their endurance. Sarah had waterproofed all her communication gear in advance, sealing it in protective cases that would keep it functional even if dropped in the water. The river crossing went smoothly, but the climb up the hillside was brutal. The combination of her regular field equipment and the additional communication gear made every step a struggle against gravity and fatigue. Halfway up the hill, Novak, the Czech soldier, suddenly stopped and looked back at her. "You need help with that pack?" he asked. Sarah was breathing hard and felt like her legs were on fire. But she shook her head. "I can manage." "It's not about managing," Santos, the Spanish soldier, interjected. "It's about efficiency. If you're exhausted when we reach the target, you won't be able to do your job effectively." Sarah realized he was right. This wasn't about proving she could suffer in silence. It was about mission success. She allowed Novak to take some of the heavier communication equipment, which immediately made the climb more manageable. "Smart decision," Thompson said approvingly. "Knowing when to accept help is a sign of experience, not weakness." At the second target, the team faced a more complex reconnaissance challenge. The mock enemy facility was larger and more heavily defended, requiring them to observe from multiple positions to gather complete intelligence. This meant Sarah had to maintain communication while the team was spread out over a wider area. She set up a relay system using portable transmitters, creating a communication network that allowed all team members to stay in contact while covering their assigned observation sectors. The setup was technically complex and required her to move between positions to adjust equipment and troubleshoot problems. While working on a particularly stubborn radio link, Sarah became aware that someone was watching her. She looked up to see Anderson studying her work with obvious interest. "I've never seen a field communication setup like this," he said. "Most operators just use standard radio protocols and hope for the best." "Standard protocols fail when the enemy knows what to expect," Sarah replied, making final adjustments to the antenna positioning. "You have to think like an electronic warfare specialist to stay ahead of their countermeasures." "Where did you learn to do this?" "Combat experience teaches you things they don't cover in training manuals," she said simply. The reconnaissance of the second target took 4 hours, during which Sarah successfully maintained communication despite increasingly sophisticated jamming attempts. Her improvised relay network performed perfectly, allowing the team to coordinate their observations and report detailed intelligence to Base Command. As evening approached, the team prepared for the most challenging part of their mission, infiltrating close to the third target for detailed observation and intelligence gathering. This target was an abandoned factory complex that had been set up to simulate a high-value enemy facility. The approach required them to cross open terrain where they would be vulnerable to detection by opposing forces role-playing as enemy guards. They had to move carefully, using natural cover and timing their movements to avoid patrol schedules. Sarah found herself struggling with fatigue as the long day of physical exertion took its toll. Despite sharing some equipment weight with Novak, she was carrying more gear than the other team members, and the constant mental focus required for maintaining communications was exhausting. During a brief rest stop, Wright handed her an energy bar and a water bottle. "You're doing good work," he said quietly. "Better than most communication specialists I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot of them." "Thanks," Sarah replied, grateful for both the food and the acknowledgement. "I owe you an apology," Wright continued. "Yesterday, I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your appearance. That was unprofessional and unfair." Sarah was surprised by his directness. "Apology accepted. The thing is," Wright said, "in this business, you learn to make quick judgments about people's capabilities. Sometimes those judgments are wrong. But when your life depends on the person next to you, You tend to be cautious about accepting new team members. I understand, but you have to give people a chance to prove themselves. Fair enough. You've certainly proven yourself today. As darkness fell, the team began their final approach to the third target. The factory complex was surrounded by open ground that had to be crossed carefully to avoid detection. Sarah's communication equipment became even more critical as they coordinated their movements with other teams and base command. The infiltration went smoothly, with the team reaching observation positions around the complex without being detected. The target was the most complex they had encountered, requiring detailed intelligence about multiple buildings, defensive positions, and simulated enemy activities. Sarah established a sophisticated communication network that allowed the team to coordinate their observations while maintaining contact with base command and the other teams. The technical challenges were significant, as the metal buildings interfered with radio signals and the enemy electronic warfare capabilities were at their most aggressive. Working through the night, Sarah made constant adjustments to her equipment, switching frequencies, adjusting antenna positions, and implementing countermeasures to maintain clear communication. The work required intense concentration and technical expertise, as even small mistakes could compromise the entire mission. Around midnight, disaster struck. A power surge from a lightning strike knocked out several pieces of Sarah's primary communication equipment. In the space of a few seconds, the team lost contact with base command and the other teams. "We're blind," Thompson said tersely. "How long to get communications back?" Sarah was already working on the problem, running diagnostics on her damaged equipment. "Primary systems are fried. I need to reconfigure everything using backup equipment and alternative frequency bands." "How long?" Thompson repeated. 20 minutes if everything goes perfectly. Maybe longer if I run into problems." The team settled into defensive positions while Sarah worked frantically to restore communications. This was exactly the kind of emergency situation that separated competent technicians from true experts. Everything she had learned through training and combat experience came into play as she jury-rigged solutions and implemented backup protocols. Working by the dim light of a red-filtered flashlight, Sarah systematically rebuilt her communication network using whatever equipment still functioned. She bypassed damaged circuits, recalibrated frequency settings, and established new antenna configurations that could work around the interference from the factory buildings. 15 minutes after the lightning strike, she successfully re-established contact with base command. Her jury-rigged system wasn't as sophisticated as her original setup, but it was functional and reliable. "Base, this is Team Delta," she transmitted. "Communication restored after lightning damage. Continuing mission." "Outstanding work, Team Delta," came the reply. "All other teams have reported communication difficulties. You're the only team that has restored full contact." Thompson looked at Sarah with new respect. That was impressive problem-solving under pressure. The remainder of the mission went smoothly, with the team gathering the required intelligence and maintaining communication throughout the night. As dawn approached, they began their extraction to the designated pickup point. During the long hike back through the forest, Sarah reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. She had proven her technical capabilities under challenging conditions and had begun to earn the respect of her teammates. The physical demands had been significant, but she had met them without complaint. More importantly, she had demonstrated that her gender was irrelevant to her effectiveness as a soldier. Her technical expertise, problem-solving abilities, and dedication to mission success spoke for themselves. As they reached the extraction point, Sarah overheard Wright talking quietly to Muller. "That woman knows her business," the British soldier was saying. "I've never seen anyone restore communications that quickly, after a complete system failure." "Agreed," Mueller replied. "My assumptions about her were clearly wrong." Sarah smiled to herself as she packed her equipment for transport back to the base camp. It had been a good start, but she knew this was only the first day of a month-long exercise. There would be many more opportunities to prove herself and many more challenges to overcome. The Ghost Hawk tattoo on her shoulder seemed to pulse with significance as she climbed into the transport vehicle. The symbol represented something that none of her teammates could understand yet, but perhaps someday they would learn its true meaning. 3 weeks into the NATO exercise, Sarah had established herself as one of the most capable communication specialists in the entire operation. Her technical expertise and problem-solving abilities had earned grudging respect from most of the soldiers, though some still maintained their prejudiced attitudes. The daily challenges had grown increasingly complex, testing every aspect of their training and endurance. On this particular morning, the camp buzzed with unusual tension. Word had spread that a new officer was arriving to observe the final week of exercises, a legendary Navy SEAL commander whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. Commander Jake Morrison was said to be one of the most decorated special operations officers in the U.S. military, with over 20 years of experience in the most dangerous missions around the world. Sarah was in the communications tent, calibrating equipment for the day's exercise, when she overheard several soldiers discussing Morrison's imminent arrival. "I heard he once completed a mission in Somalia with a bullet in his shoulder," one soldier was saying. "Didn't even report the wound until after the objective was secured." "That's nothing," another replied. "My buddy served under him in Afghanistan." Morrison supposedly walked 15 miles through hostile territory carrying a wounded teammate, then went back out on patrol the same night. The stories grew more elaborate with each telling, painting a picture of a soldier who embodied everything these elite forces aspired to be. Sarah listened with interest but remained focused on her work. She had learned that military legends often grew in the telling, and the reality was usually more complex than the stories suggested. Around midday, a convoy of vehicles arrived at the camp, kicking up clouds of dust as they approached the command area. Sarah glanced up from her equipment to see a tall figure emerge from the lead vehicle. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about the man's presence. The way he moved, the immediate attention he commanded from everyone around him. Commander Morrison was exactly what one would expect from a legendary SEAL officer. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and intensely focused eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings. His uniform bore the insignia of numerous elite units and combat deployments, and there was an air of quiet authority about him that needed no announcement. Sarah watched from the communications tent as Morrison was greeted by Colonel Peterson and the other senior officers. Even the most experienced soldiers in the camp seemed to defer to his presence, and conversations became more subdued as word of his arrival spread. The afternoon exercise was particularly challenging, involving multiple teams conducting simultaneous operations while under simulated artillery fire and electronic warfare attacks. Sarah's team had been tasked with establishing a forward command post and maintaining communication with scattered reconnaissance elements. As she worked to keep the communication links operational despite intense jamming, Sarah became aware that someone was observing her work. She glanced up to see Commander Morrison standing nearby, watching her technical procedures with obvious interest. "Carry on," he said simply when she paused. "Don't mind me." Sarah returned to her work, but she could feel the weight of his observation. Morrison wasn't just watching casually. He was studying her techniques, evaluating her competence with the keen eye of someone who understood the critical importance of communications in combat operations. The exercise continued for several hours, with Sarah successfully maintaining contact despite increasingly sophisticated interference attempts. Her jury-rigged solutions and creative problem-solving kept the communication network functional when standard procedures would have failed. As the exercise concluded, Morrison approached her position. "Impressive work," he said without preamble. "I've seen a lot of communication specialists in my time, but few who could maintain operational effectiveness under that level of electronic warfare pressure." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, continuing to pack her equipment. "Where did you learn those countermeasure techniques?" "Some of those procedures aren't in any manual I know of." "Combat experience, sir. Afghanistan taught me that the enemy doesn't follow our training manuals, so our solutions can't either." Morrison nodded approvingly. "Afghanistan. Which unit?" 82nd Airborne, sir. 2 tours with the 3rd Brigade combat team. The 3rd Brigade saw heavy action during that period," Morrison observed. "Real combat, not training exercises." "Yes, sir. We lost good people over there." There was a moment of understanding between them, the kind of recognition that passed between combat veterans who had experienced the reality of war. Morrison's expression softened slightly, and Sarah sensed that she had gained a measure of his respect. "What's your assessment of this exercise so far?" he asked. Sarah considered her answer carefully. This was clearly more than casual conversation. Morrison was evaluating her judgment as well as her technical skills. "The technical challenges have been excellent, sir. The international cooperation aspect is working better than I expected, but there's still some friction between different national units, mostly based on preconceptions rather than actual performance differences." "Elaborate." Sarah hesitated, wondering if she should mention the discrimination she had experienced. But Morrison's direct approach seemed to invite honesty. Some soldiers here have difficulty accepting that capability isn't determined by appearance or background, sir. They make assumptions about what someone can or can't do based on factors that have nothing to do with actual performance. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you referring to gender discrimination? Among other things, yes, sir. And how have you handled this? By doing my job better than anyone expects, sir. Performance speaks louder than arguments. Morrison studied her for a long moment. You're right about that. But sometimes performance alone isn't enough to change entrenched attitudes. That evening, the camp gathered for the traditional briefing and social hour that marked the end of each training week. The mess tent had been rearranged to accommodate the various national groups, and the atmosphere was more relaxed than usual. Sarah sat with her team members, who had gradually warmed to her over the weeks of shared challenges. Even Wright and Mueller, who had initially been skeptical of her abilities, now treated her as a valued member of the team. Commander Morrison moved through the gathering, speaking with soldiers from different units and observing the social dynamics within the international force. Sarah noticed that he paid particular attention to how the various groups interacted, and she suspected he was evaluating more than just technical performance. Around 9 o'clock, Morrison stood to address the assembled soldiers. The conversation gradually died down as everyone turned their attention to the legendary commander. I've been observing your training for the past week, Morrison began, his voice carrying easily through the tent. I've seen exceptional performance from all of you, representing some of the finest special operations forces in the world. He paused, scanning the faces of the assembled soldiers. But I've also observed something that concerns me. Some of you are allowing preconceptions and prejudices to interfere with your professional judgment. The tent had become completely silent, and Sarah could sense tension in the air. Morrison's tone had shifted to something more serious, more commanding. In special operations, your life depends on the competence of your teammates. Making judgments based on anything other than demonstrated ability is not just unprofessional, it's potentially fatal. Morrison's eyes found Sarah in the crowd, and she felt a flutter of nervousness. Was he about to single her out in front of everyone? I want to tell you a story, Morrison continued. 5 years ago, I was leading a mission in a very hostile environment. Our communication specialist was a young soldier who didn't fit the typical profile of what some people think a special operations communicator should look like. Sarah's heart began racing as she realized where this story was heading. During the mission, our primary communication equipment was destroyed by an IED blast. We were cut off from support, surrounded by hostile forces, and facing a situation that could have ended very badly for all of us. The tent was completely silent now. Every soldier hanging on Morrison's words. This young specialist, working under extreme pressure while under fire, managed to jury-rig a communication system from damaged equipment and establish contact with our extraction team. That improvised system guided in the helicopters that saved our lives. Morrison paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Later, I discovered that this specialist had been subjected to constant harassment and discrimination from other team members who questioned whether someone of their background belonged in special operations. Sarah felt her face burning with embarrassment and surprise. She had no idea that Morrison had been aware of the team dynamics during that deployment. The irony, of course, was that this specialist, who some had dismissed as unfit for special operations, ended up saving the lives of everyone who had questioned their presence. Morrison's eyes found Sarah again, and this time his expression was unmistakably supportive. Sergeant Sarah Martinez, would you please stand up? Sarah felt as if the world had stopped. Every eye in the tent was on her as she slowly rose from her seat, her heart pounding. Sergeant Martinez was that communication specialist, Morrison announced. And she's here with you now, continuing to demonstrate the same exceptional performance that saved my team's lives 5 years ago. The revelation hit the assembled soldiers like a thunderbolt. Many of them stared at Sarah with new understanding, suddenly seeing her in a completely different light. Morrison continued, his voice carrying absolute authority. Some of you have spent the past 3 weeks questioning whether Sergeant Martinez belongs here, despite clear evidence of her exceptional capabilities. Let me make something absolutely clear. She has proven her worth in actual combat, under conditions that would challenge any of you. The commander's tone grew harder, more commanding. More importantly, her performance here has consistently exceeded that of many soldiers who questioned her presence. If any of you still have doubts about her capabilities, I suggest you examine your own performance before questioning hers. Sarah remained standing, feeling exposed and vulnerable but also strangely proud. Morrison was publicly acknowledging her achievements in a way that would be impossible for anyone to dismiss or ignore. "But there's something else you need to understand," Morrison said, his voice taking on a different quality. "Sergeant Martinez carries more than just exceptional technical skills." He walked closer to where Sarah was standing, his eyes never leaving her face. "In certain special operations communities, there are symbols that carry deep meaning, symbols that represent not just achievement, but sacrifice, dedication, and proven performance under the most extreme conditions." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what Morrison was about to reveal. "Sergeant Martinez, would you please show these soldiers your Ghost Hawk tattoo?" The request hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Ghost Hawk tattoo was something she had never revealed to anyone at the camp. It was deeply personal, connected to events and people that most soldiers would never understand. With trembling hands, Sarah rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the intricate tattoo that covered her shoulder. The design showed a stylized hawk in flight, its wings spread wide, rendered in black ink with subtle gray shading that made it appear almost ghost-like. The reaction from the assembled soldiers was immediate and dramatic. Several of them gasped audibly, and she saw recognition in the eyes of some of the more experienced special operations veterans. Commander Morrison's voice grew quiet, almost reverent. "The Ghost Hawk is not a tattoo you can simply request. It's earned through actions that few soldiers will ever have the opportunity to attempt, and fewer still will survive." He turned to address the entire gathering. "The Ghost Hawk represents a level of performance and sacrifice that goes beyond normal military service. It's given only to those who have saved the lives of special operations personnel at great personal risk, in circumstances where failure would mean death for everyone involved." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as Morrison continued. 5 years ago, Sergeant Martinez didn't just restore communications and guide in our extraction. She did it while wounded, under direct fire, with hostile forces closing in on our position. She refused medical attention until every member of the team was safely extracted. The tent was completely silent now, the weight of Morrison's words settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. "The Ghost Hawk tattoo is recognition from the special operations community that this soldier has proven themselves at the highest level possible. It represents a debt that can never be fully repaid." Morrison turned back to Sarah, and for the first time since she had known him, his expression showed genuine emotion. "Sergeant Martinez saved my life and the lives of 7 other special operations personnel that day. We recommended her for the Medal of Honor, but she declined, saying she was just doing her job." Sarah could no longer hold back her tears. The memories of that day, the explosion, the gunfire, the desperate race to establish communications while her shoulder bled from shrapnel wounds, came flooding back. Commander Morrison stepped closer and spoke directly to her, though his words carried to everyone in the tent. "Thank you, Sergeant Martinez. Not just for that day 5 years ago, but for continuing to serve with the same dedication and excellence that saved our lives." The tent erupted in applause, but not the polite, obligatory clapping she had expected. This was genuine, heartfelt appreciation from soldiers who now understood exactly who they had been serving alongside for the past 3 weeks. As Sarah sat back down, she was surrounded by her teammates and other soldiers who wanted to express their respect and apologize for their previous attitudes. The transformation in their behavior was immediate and dramatic. Wright, the British SAS soldier who had initially questioned her capabilities most strongly, approached with obvious humility. "Sergeant Martinez," he said formally, "I owe you more than just an apology. My behavior toward you has been inexcusable, especially considering what you've accomplished." "It's all right," Sarah replied, wiping her eyes. "You didn't know." "That's exactly the point," Wright said firmly. "I should have judged you by your performance here, not by my preconceptions. You've consistently outperformed most of us, and I was too stubborn to acknowledge it." Similar conversations took place throughout the evening as soldiers who had dismissed or harassment Sarah sought to make amends. The atmosphere in the camp was fundamentally changed, and Sarah found herself treated not just with respect, but with something approaching reverence. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, Commander Morrison approached Sarah privately. "How are you holding up?" he asked with genuine concern. "It's overwhelming," Sarah admitted. "I never expected anything like this. I probably should have spoken to you before revealing your background so publicly," Morrison said. "But I felt it was necessary. The discrimination you were facing here was unacceptable, and these soldiers needed to understand exactly who they were dealing with. I appreciate what you did, sir, but I hope people will judge me by my current performance, not just by what happened 5 years ago. Morrison smiled. From what I've observed, your current performance speaks for itself. The Ghost Hawk just provides context for those too stubborn to see what was already evident. The final week of the NATO exercise passed in a dramatically different atmosphere. Sarah found herself sought out for advice and consultation by soldiers who had previously ignored or dismissed her. Her technical expertise was no longer questioned, and her tactical input was valued and respected. The closing ceremony was a formal affair, with representatives from all 12 participating nations acknowledging the success of the joint training exercise. Individual achievements were recognized, and Sarah was surprised to receive a commendation for exceptional technical performance under challenging conditions. As the soldiers prepared to return to their home units, many sought out Sarah to express their appreciation for what they had learned from working with her. The transformation in attitudes had been complete and lasting. Commander Morrison found her as she was packing her final equipment. "What's next for you, Sergeant?" he asked. "Back to my regular unit, sir. We deploy again in 6 months." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "You know, there are opportunities in special operations for someone with your skills and experience. If you're ever interested in a new challenge, let me know." Sarah smiled. "I'll keep that in mind, sir. But for now, I'm content with proving that capability comes in all forms, and that assumptions are often wrong." "Indeed they are," Morrison agreed. "The best soldiers I've known have come from the most unexpected backgrounds. It's the individuals who overcome the greatest challenges who often perform best when everything is on the line." As Sarah prepared to leave the NATO camp, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, and the experiences of the past month. She had faced discrimination and skepticism, but she had also found respect and recognition through her performance and dedication. The Ghost Hawk tattoo on her shoulder was no longer a secret, but she realized it had never been the source of her strength. Her capabilities, her dedication, and her willingness to serve alongside others in the most challenging circumstances. These were what truly defined her as a soldier. The NATO exercise had tested her in ways she hadn't expected, but it had also validated her belief that performance and character mattered more than appearances or preconceptions. She was the same soldier she had always been, but now others could see her clearly as well. As her transport vehicle pulled away from the camp, Sarah looked back one final time at the place where she had faced one of her greatest challenges and emerged stronger than before. The Ghost Hawk seemed to spread its wings in approval, ready for whatever mission lay ahead.